is eventually a New Deal coming through to the European Parliament, he will have a say in that. And he'll have a say as a representative in the European Parliament.
But you say governments should negotiate. They haven't made such a good fist of it so far.
Sorry, I didn't say should. I said they do. Only governments can negotiate international treaties.
The EU's not a government, so how does that work with your theory?
Because the EU has, on the Council, the 28 governments come together, the 27 who are negotiating against us. So it's governments that must do that. They bear the responsibility. If Nigel Farage had wanted to be part of those negotiations, then he should have stood for election to the UK Parliament and tried to become part of the government. He's refused to do that, or he's declined always to do that.
Well, he's tried several times to become an MP. I think seven, isn't it?
Indeed, and failed to do so. The only other thing I would say is that, you know, when we talk about a second referendum, Jo talks about a second referendum because she's always wanted to remain. She always, from the very beginning...
Like some very senior members of your own
party. I've been very consistent, as have the Liberal Democrats.
From the beginning, Jo has believed that the democratic result of the referendum didn't matter.
No, that's not true.
Sorry.
That's not true, Ben.
And that is why she has always wanted the second referendum.
Jo's trying to get a word in here, Barry. She's disagreeing with you vehemently.
We said, and it was our leader, Tim Farron, at the time, who came out after the referendum, and he said that when the Brexit deal is negotiated, that should be put to the people, because there will be details of that are complex details of a new relationship with the European Union, and that should be up to the people to decide. Yes, I have always felt that our best place is in the European Union, which has been such a beacon for peace and hope and human rights for decades.
Which is all the reasons that I also voted Remain and wanted to do.
Actually, you didn't vote to invoke Article 50, which means from day one
we should
use the democratic result of that referendum.
We should not at all have started the Article 50 process when the government had no idea of its negotiating position. That is what led us to this situation of having these deadlines. Well, we could have known that. The government could have set out its negotiating position before invoking Article 50. Instead, it took the Cabinet more than a year after that. So that was a hugely foolish decision to have taken at that point in time.
Do you know what? Let's go mad. Let's move off Brexit, shall we? What do you think? We've talked about it for some time, some considerable time. There's another story that's been big in the news today. I want to address that as well. Janet Rimmer.
Will a cut in tuition fees do anything to address the inequalities in our education system?
Now, Stephen, I do want to come to you on this. Obviously, as someone who works in education, our system is rather different from yours. I think yours is actually even more expensive than ours. But do you think the cut in tuition fees that's been suggested today by the government, though extending the amount of time students will then have to pay it back, is a good idea?
Yes, in terms of cutting inequality. Now, I work for an institution where the tuition is £37,000 a year. Even with financial aid, on average, it works out to £12,000. So I look at this debate with a bit of amusement, considering what a bargain higher education is in this country to begin with. But yes, I think it should be...
I'm not sure it feels like that to quite a few of the students, though.
It doesn't, but if you got a bill from Harvard University, then you'd appreciate what a bargain is in this country. But yes, it should go lower to address inequality, because education is a public good. A better educated workforce, a better educated populace brings with it many advantages, and one can justify public expenditure to bring it to more people.
Alex, Nigel Farage has talked about the Brexit Party campaigning and wanting to stand for the general election. Have you got a policy on this yet?
We don't have a policy on it yet because we're 6 weeks old. So, you know, if we did have a policy, let's be frank, it would have been cobbled together in a rush, and it probably wouldn't be worth the paper it's written on, much like most of the other parties' manifestos.
So shall we not bother with an answer from you then?
No, because what the Brexit Party wants to do, which is actually fascinating, revolutionary in our democracy, is policy make from the bottom up. And so we're going to have a consultative process with our subscribers, and we're going to come up with our policy platform that is truly democratic, not pushed on people from below, but from the bottom up. And on the question...
How long is that all going to take? I mean, we could have a general election
We've already started, so, well, you know, we've got to crack on with it then, because you're right, we might have a general election in the next year. But
do you think you'll have your policies ready by then?
Yeah, I would hope so. I'd hope so. There's a lot of determination to move quickly. But on that question, therefore, you know, I'd be part of, I hope, that policy development process, and so therefore I'd have my 2 bits to add to it. And what I'd say about this, this report is it's talking about, yes, cutting down the annual payments for tuition fees, but extending the repayment period. And of course, you pay interest on that. So really, you don't end up with a net result that you've got any less debt. And the difficulty is, at the moment, there's a cut-off point. So when you are finding it difficult to repay your student loan, you get to a point and they say, OK, you know, enough's enough. This removes that cut-off point. So actually, it's going to be more punitive to graduates on lower incomes in the long run. It actually does the opposite of what it's designed to do. And you know, we actually really need to look at this situation, because here we are in Epsom College, which was founded as a medical school. At the moment, most medical students leave with debt of around £82,000, and yet we are so desperately in need of doctors and nurses in our NHS. So the situation we have at the moment with university tuition is simply not sustainable. But it's also about tertiary education in general. It's vocational qualifications as well, it's apprenticeships. And actually, by creating more diversity and a diversity of funding and support for further education, that is the way you're going to get social mobility in this country.
The man at the back in the white shirt.
2 points to raise. First one is you talk about reducing the tuition fees. What about cutting the tax break for independent schools? That would reduce the gap in deprivation because the kids would interact with each other. And the second point is you talk about tertiary education. I want to be a pilot when I'm older. Training costs for that start about £120,000. How is someone going to afford that?
Okay.
And aviation contributes to the economy massively.
Man here in the black coat.
Would funding and social services and equality be such issues if the UK wasn't the biggest tax avoidance enabler and if we didn't have a lower corporate tax rate than Afghanistan?
One there, in the shirt.
I've got 2 children. Well, we've got 4 children, but 2 have just been through the education system. They are facing the whole of their careers, and they will not have paid, or they might just, by the time they retire, they might have paid this student debt off. They're paying 6%, I think, is the interest rate. It's just ridiculous, and it's unsustainable. And I think it does prevent children going to university. And they are lucky because we've been to university, we have stuff to give them, but I think there's an awful lot of kids who can't do it. 30 years ago, I went on a march. The only march I've ever been on was to stop tuition fees, and I'm absolutely horrified at what's been done to the next generation by my generation. It's awful, dreadful.
Joe, obviously Liberal Democrats got into a little bit of slightly tricky area with tuition fees a while back. What's your position now?
Well, I mean, in terms of things I didn't think I'd find myself saying tonight, I agree with Alex. So the system that is basically in place is a graduate tax, effectively, that above a certain amount of earning, you pay 9% of your income for 30 years. And the extension of that to 40 years, just like the lady in the audience was explaining, was that is going to hit a lot more people who, at least at the end of the 30 years, would have that written off, and now they're going to be paying that for another 10 years. The highest earning graduates won't be paying it because they've already paid off all the money. So this is really targeted to hit the lowest earning graduates. It seems to me a bonkers thing to have suggested if you're concerned about social mobility. But in terms of the best way to tackle that inequality, I think it's about starting much younger. The money that you invest in the early years of education and before education is where you get the biggest benefits. I represent a very middle-class, affluent constituency. In one of the towns, 80% of young children go to university. 5 or 6 miles down the road in Glasgow Govan, it's 4%. Now, that's not because of tuition fees, because we don't have them in Scotland. That's because of the lack of investment or aspiration of young people that don't even grow up thinking that this is an option for them. And that's where we need to focus that early years intervention if we really want to tackle that inequality.
What would Labour do, Barry, when it comes to tuition fees? Because you've not been calling for them to be cut, have you?
The lady's absolutely right when she poses the question the way that she did. Because she's saying, look, how is this going to solve the inequality? In itself, it's not. In itself, this proposal is a regressive measure. And that's why we have said, and we committed ourselves at the last general election in our manifesto, to abolishing tuition fees for students. But Jo's right when she says...
And you're still standing by that?
And we stand by that. What is absolutely... What Jo has to explain, of course, is why the coalition government cut Sure Start. Sure Start, which was absolutely one of the most important things that we can be doing with those early years, actually helping parents to learn how to parent as well as developing the children at that young age. That's why we put more money into that in our manifesto. That's why we've also said that if you look at what's gone on with this appalling fee funding, the school funding formula that the government has introduced, which has absolutely meant that in every constituency what we are seeing is a lower amount of money per capita per pupil in schools. There's more money going into the system. That's easy, of course, because there's more children going into the system. But actually, there is less per capita going in. And the real fairness in education has to come by putting that commitment, that investment in our youngest children at nursery level and beyond, then into primary and secondary. That's where we're going to make most difference. And to the gentleman up at the top with the white shirt, he was absolutely right. And that also is part of our party's commitment, that we would take away the VAT relief on independent schools, just as you said.
There's lots of hands up, so let me get around some of you in the audience. The woman there in the glasses.
So I wanted to ask about what you said about fairness. In real terms, for A-level state school pupils, funding has dropped by about 20% since 2010. Yeah. Now, that equates to about £21 per academic day, or £11 per student per calendar day.
Can I just ask, are you in the education system?
I am indeed.
You're a teacher?
I am a teacher, yes. And that is unsustainable. I mean, how are we going to produce quality graduates if the funding is failing at that level?
That's exactly it.
It seems like the system is designed so that you can't pay the loan back. Is not part of the solution reducing the interest rates on the loans and also having some kind of mechanism so that you can pay more back earlier if you want to do that to try and reduce your loan?
A lot of people nodding their head at that. Yes, the man there.
Hi there. I do agree with the reducing the tuition fees. Just the question is trying to balance that with the quality of the education that you get as a result, and to make sure that the funding matches. The funding from the government matches the loss that the universities would get. Yes. We have an esteemed colleague from Harvard. A lot of our top teachers in universities actually end up migrating to other countries because they can earn more money, get better opportunities than they can here, which degrades the level of a university degree in this country. So, yes, I agree with reducing the fees, but we've got to maintain the standards to make our education system something which is worth it for the economy that is more and more competitive for the future.
Rory, so what do you make of I mean, this is a review that was commissioned by the government that suggested cutting tuition fees. I was slightly unclear as to whether the government was then going to make up the amount of money that the university would be losing by the cut in tuition fees, which is the point I think you're coming to.
I think that's the absolutely key question, which is that we now actually are in a position, largely, I would say this, wouldn't I? Because our government has actually got the finances in a good position, where if we can avoid a no-deal Brexit, there is an opportunity to put more money into education. But we have to make sure that if we are going to make those changes, and some of those changes I absolutely agree on, one of the scandals is around the level of those interest rates. I think we should also be thinking more about the maintenance grants. Right? Those are the sort of things we should be spending money on. But if we're to do this, we have to...
Your government did abolish them.
Yeah,
okay.
and it's Labour Party policy.
And is now suggesting reinstating...
Labour Party policy.
We inherited a catastrophic financial